This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. Well, it is already Sunday morning in Beijing, and the situation there remains a standoff. Tiananmen Square is still crowded with thousands upon thousands of students, but we're now told that as many as 300,000 soldiers and security officials are in place in buildings surrounding the square and in the tunnels beneath it. And as that news spread through the crowd, some of the students brought out gas masks. Even so, their mood still had something of a holiday air about it. We're going live now to Susan Spencer to get the latest in Beijing. Susan?
Bob, although the city is under martial law, it really looks more like Mardi Gras. There are many, many people on the street. As you said, they expected something to happen overnight. It didn't. The demonstrators this morning are elated that they made it through this first very tense night completely unscathed. There's no question that they are in total control of this city. Still, it was a very, very uneasy 24 hours. Military helicopters made repeated passes over Tiananmen Square throughout the day. Unclear to the thousands still camped there whether these were friendly or unfriendly missions, but it was shortly after that that the government abruptly pulled the plug on all satellite transmission, ending live broadcasts. On the square itself, the rumors fly that troops are coming, that they are in the subway, that they are in the surrounding buildings. But so far, no troops have been spotted, and all attempting to approach the square have been stopped by students. The hunger strikers have ended their fast. Ambulance runs are infrequent now. The demonstrators say this is a simple sit-in. But under the new martial law decree, it is also illegal. This is the first time martial law has been declared since the founding of Communist China, and it outlaws rumors, speeches, boycotts, sit-ins, interviews, videotapes, and any report the government decides is inflammatory. Chinese Central Television, whose correspondents this week reveled in unprecedented freedom to cover the protests, is now under the control of the army, sources say. CCTV Today kept rebroadcasting yesterday's hour-long speech by hardline Premier Li Peng, justifying the crackdown, asserting that disturbances caused by a small group of subversives were creating chaos. Chaos the government had a responsibility to stop. Clearly, the hardliners among the leaders are in control, but reports of the resignation of Zhao Ziyang, the most moderate of the three at the top, still aren't confirmed. Meanwhile, students continue to occupy the sidewalk in front of Zhengnan High, the official government compound. Bob, there was one major overnight development. The demonstrators have put up roadblocks now on all the major streets down to the square. Now, there had been checkpoints here, but as of this morning, there are now buses with their tires deflated, big concrete barriers, and even garbage dumpsters blocking the way. But no troops at all, no troop movement at all that we can detect.
Susan, how are you all in the news bureau there getting around? I'm told that some of the drivers now refuse to go down to the square.
They do, and probably justifiably, since their vehicles could be confiscated legally, since we're under martial law and not really supposed to be going anywhere. We are hailed like conquering heroes. It's a very strange feeling. We have no trouble at all getting through these roadblocks. Yesterday, when I was down there, people literally mob the car. They come up to the window and pound on the window and flash you the V sign and say, thank you, report what's going on here. Tell everybody what's happening.
All right. Thank you, Susan Spencer. The only violence reported in recent hours was just west of the city, where armed police attacked some students with cattle prods, but it was late last night our time when one of the worst incidents occurred, and Barry Peterson was caught in the middle of it and has our report.
Martial law was only moments old when people and police clashed. The police stationed at this major freeway overpass on the west side of Beijing, apparently to keep this main road open for troops being sent to the city. The situation grew uglier as onlookers became protesters ready to take revenge for those clubbed in the incident. One policeman tried to stand in front of our camera to keep us from taking any more pictures. Instead, he was shoved aside by the angry, surging crowd. And as happens in moments like this, the situation suddenly changed. The police losing control of the intersection, retreating to their bus. The crowd suddenly with the upper hand. Meanwhile, on the highway below, the Army was making its move. A convoy trying to drive down this major highway that leads downtown. Soldiers clearing a path, ready to fight off any protesters. But the crowd had a simple strategy. They simply flooded the highway, even though they were up against soldiers armed with AK-47 assault rifles. Once the convoy was stopped, the berating of the soldiers began. Don't hit us, she cries. Please, someone, save our country. Martial law changed this protest. A few days ago, this was a city of youthful enthusiasm and hopeful innocence. No more. Terry Peterson, CBS News, Beijing.
As the pictures have been coming in from China, it's been obvious that for no segment of Chinese society has the ordeal been more trying than for the young soldiers in the Chinese army. Bob Simon's been with them, and here's his report.
The roads going from the west of Beijing to Tiananmen Square, the heart of China, were alive with army convoys early this morning, but their safe passage ran into impediments called people, who blocked them with their bodies, absurdly at times, and with their determination. Bus drivers created ad hoc roadblocks by taking the day off. Students tried to befriend some soldiers, offered them drinks. When one actually took a sip, he became the hero of the hour. Local militias ended up prisoners in their own barracks. Whenever they ventured out, people persuaded them to go back quick. In the west of Beijing this morning, authorities seemed to be with the people. In this People's Republic, the grounds of an army hospital had been transformed into a staging area for soldiers. There was disagreement over whether our CBS News camera crew should be allowed to take pictures.
You are welcome. Some officials are trying to make us leave. They're telling us it's an army hospital, and according to Chinese law, we should not be here, which makes sense. But the people here seem to think that we should be here. All right.
He said, the people will never again serve those emperors. Some 5 miles west of the square, 5 truckloads of soldiers from the People's Army were having an encounter with the people. They'd been sent down from Shandong province on the Yellow Sea. They'd been kept quarantined from the news. They'd been told they were going on maneuvers. People begged and implored, don't fight us, come join us. Some foot soldiers of the Revolutionary Army were being radicalized. They ended up retreating. Short of a massacre, it was clearly the only way to go. Some young soldiers seem to borrow a tactic from childhood. Maybe, if I cannot see it, it will all go away. Bob Simon, CBS News, Beijing.
Those demonstrations have spread all over the Far East. 30,000 marched today in support of the students in Hong Kong, 20,000 in typhoon-like weather in Macau. And there were sympathy marches in many Chinese cities. The largest ones in Shanghai, where as many as 500,000 turned out. Bruce Morton was there much of the week and filed this report today.
Everyone has heard things, heard rumors. In Shanghai, every student had heard that 1, or was it 2, or was it 3, hunger strikers had died in Beijing. A banner read, "One person has become a butterfly," a reference to a Chinese story about young lovers sadly dead. It wasn't true. No one had died. At the airport, everyone had heard things. There is martial law. Partly true. We may not be able to land in Beijing. We landed, though one of the flight attendants wondered if this might not be the last flight in. Driving in from the airport, traffic was light. We passed 2 or 3 trucks full of people with hands aloft, the old power to the people salute. We passed a sign. The People's Liberation Army should love the people. So far, apparently, it does. China is full of contrasts, but it always was. Today, it is also full of uncertainty and full of rumors. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Beijing.
The Bush administration today offered its first real assessment of the developments in China. We'll have that story in a moment, and later the incredible scene behind the scenes as the Chinese pull the plug on television coverage. Bush continued to wave off questions on China today, but Secretary of State Baker finally offered the administration's first substantive assessment of the situation. It all came at the vacation White House in Maine, and Wyatt Andrews reports.
As events played out in China, President Bush today mixed work and play at his seaside home in Maine. For pleasure, he cruised the Atlantic. For business, he hosted the President of France. Mr. Bush's response to the turmoil in Beijing has been cautious. He has personally avoided any public comment, while his Secretary of State today urged restraint.
I think we should be expressing our support for freedom of speech, for democratization, and for freedom of assembly, and that's what we're doing. I do not think that we should in any way be seen to be somehow inciting to riot.
As a former envoy to China, President Bush is being careful not to provoke his old friends in the Chinese leadership for fear that could be counterproductive. Secretary Baker denies suggestions that response is weak, saying the United States does not want to see an unstable China and predicting that political reform there is inevitable anyway.
What may be happening here is that the economic reforms in China got out a little bit ahead of the political reforms. When people taste the fruits of freedom, it's not our view that you can reverse that process.
The president, meanwhile, was trying to reverse a rift within NATO and lock up French support for his side in the dispute. Mr. Bush still refuses new talks on nuclear reductions in Europe until the Soviets cut back conventional forces. Today, he was using some personal diplomacy on French President Mitterrand. On China, the administration decided not to issue any bolder statement of encouragement to the students, largely out of fears that events could move too fast. To the White House, a China that changes slowly is better than a China embroiled in civil war. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Kennebunkport, Maine.
Thousands of Chinese students studying in this country demonstrated today in support of the popular uprising in their homeland. Richard Schlesinger in New York now with more on that.
The Chinese rallying cry echoed from coast to coast today. More than 2,000 students came from college campuses in the East to march on the Chinese embassy in Washington. Their purpose, to show solidarity with the demonstrators back home.
We have the same feeling as students in Beijing have. We really support them.
The scene was similar at demonstrations in San Francisco, in Houston, and in Chicago. But it's not only Chinese students who are rallying in support of their colleagues in Beijing, it's also Chinese Americans, as these in New York's Chinatown, who are collecting money for people in China.
I don't think sympathy is the right word for me to express my feeling. I just wish I could be there working with them together.
While the protesters were loud, they were peaceful. In many cities, the specific target of the marchers was the Chinese consulate. But as in Houston, officials would not allow anyone inside. There are more than 25,000 Chinese students in the United States, many of them doing graduate work. Several hundred of them gathered today on the campus of the University of Buffalo and then tried, unsuccessfully, to cross the border into Canada. They wanted to meet with Wan Li, a Chinese Communist Party official who's visiting Canada, but he refused to see them.
If we could win, then the China will have a very bright future.
The signs and the slogans in more than 6 American cities proclaimed the same message: more freedom back home, more economic improvement, and a change in the party leadership, but all to be accomplished in a peaceful manner. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, New York.
Television viewers got more than just an extraordinary look at the remarkable story that was unfolding in Beijing. They also got an incredible behind-the-scenes view of how reporters cover the news and as it was all happening on the other side of the world. As CBS News interrupted regular programming last night, the Chinese had already pulled the plug on Dan Rather's camera in the square.
This was about to happen, and suddenly that's exactly what happened.
Back at the Beijing hotel where CBS News was headquartered, Lane Bernardos, the CBS News executive in charge, was having his own problems.
How do I know you're who you say you are?
The Chinese were trying to shut down all satellite operations.
We think turning off a satellite transmission is a very serious prospect. We have a written agreement with the Chinese Foreign Ministry that allows us to broadcast until 0100 Sunday.
As viewers in America watched on their television sets, Bernardos held off the Chinese officials as long as he could.
I think we ought to have something in writing that says the agreement is now broken.
He knew the situation was getting worse and that Rather was racing to the hotel with late details. Off camera nearby, correspondent Susan Spencer was providing play-by-play of the extraordinary scene.
I've just been told that another gentleman is making an attempt to come into the CBS control room and shut off all of our receivers while this discussion goes on. So if we suddenly go off the air, it certainly won't be any mystery as to what's happened.
Then, like the cavalry riding to the rescue in an old Western, Rather made the half-hour trip to the hotel in just over 15 minutes.
As you can see, Dan Rather just arrived.
Does anybody speak English, or who is translating?
Betty Bow's been translating for us.
Thank you.
He's just giving you the oral orders he had received from his boss.
As the situation grew more confusing, Rather found himself not only the negotiator, but the reporter covering the negotiations.
For those who find this hard to follow, welcome to the club. It's a very confusing situation here in China.
But the Chinese were growing more impatient, and as the negotiations to shut down the satellite moved outdoors, they became more intense.
Betty, the situation is, since we have an agreement in writing, if he's going to break the agreement, could we have that in writing, please?
It was soon evident why Rather had been pressing so hard to stay on the air. Late pictures of the most serious trouble had finally arrived.
It may indicate some reason why the Chinese have decided that they don't want us to continue broadcasting from here. There were students who were blocking
I respect his position and the authority of his government, and I can't physically and won't physically prevent him from doing what he has to do.
Shortly before midnight Eastern Time, Rather made one last effort to keep broadcasting.
I do protest in the most respectful manner.
But the Chinese had finally had enough. There would be no more live coverage. The satellite was being shut off.
This is Dan Rather, CBS News, Beijing.
So the extraordinary broadcasts ended as they had begun. The picture went to hash. But what an extraordinary evening it was.
Feel your oats. But first,
former U.S. Senator Warren Magnuson of Washington State died today. He was 84. Magnuson, a Democrat, served in Congress 44 years. From 1979 to 81, he was President pro tem of the Senate, third in line to the presidency. And comedian Gilda Radner lost a long battle with cancer. She died today in Los Angeles at the age of 42. Her husband, actor Gene Wilder, was at her side. Gilda Radner was one of the original stars of NBC's Saturday Night Live. Her specialty was spoofing TV newscasters.
Mother used to say to me when I was a little tiny girl before I went to sleep, it'd say, Rosanna, Dana, it's a jungle out there. Every dog has its day. You made your bed, so now you gotta sleep in it. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. Don't cry over spilled milk. And it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Tomorrow's another day. Good night, Rosanna, Dan.
They come. On the outside, it's Sunday Silence. Easy Goer with Pat Day. Back to challenge. Heads apart. Easy Goer on the inside with a slight lead. On the outside, Sunday Silence. The rest of them far back. Here's the finish of the Preakness. Sunday Silence and Easy Goer. Photo finish. Noses apart.
Don't get much closer than that. Finally tonight, the story of an animal that is being illegally hunted to the brink of extinction, Africa's black rhinoceros. Some of the survivors live in Namibia, where officials are taking a final radical step in trying to save them. Here's Richard Wagner.
In a last desperate attempt to save the few remaining rhinos, authorities in Namibia have begun removing horns from animals in the wild so that they'll be worthless to the poachers. The black rhinoceros is being poached out of existence by killers who risk being shot on sight by game wardens as they prey on a creature who's inhabited this planet longer than man. 20 years ago, 60,000 black rhinos wandered through Africa. Now that number is down to 3,000 and dropping rapidly.
Dehorning is a desperate measure. It could almost be tantamount to suggesting that you have given up the situation.
A single rhino horn can be worth as much as $50,000 to Asians or Middle Easterners who value them as dagger handles, medicine, or aphrodisiacs. Medical authorities agree the horns have absolutely no beneficial effects as medicine or as aphrodisiacs. Nonetheless, the horns continue to fetch huge sums of money around the world. Africa's most endangered large mammal may soon be simply a curiosity seen on a visit to a zoo. Richard Wagner, CBS News, Johannesburg.
And that's the news. Steve Croft will be here tomorrow, and later tonight on West 57th, a former U.S. narcotics prosecutor who says we're losing the war on drugs. I'm Bob Schieffer, CBS News in New York. Good night.
Many of golf's modern-day legends have conquered this tournament. Rich in Texas tradition, the Southwestern Bell Colonial, continuing tomorrow on CBS Sports.
This is CBS.
Next on 11 News.